This was my next to last discussion with Casey just after the diversion of the arms sale profits from Iran to the Contras had been disclosed. I called him up on the telephone and asked a number of questions, and finally he said, "Don't needle me. I don't know why I take your calls." I said that there were a number of unanswered questions. He replied, "I expect you to exercise the normal restraint of an adult." And then I said, well, many others are saying that you had to know about the diversion of the funds to the Contras. This was your pet covert operation. You had to be involved. You wouldn't be the head intelligence man if you weren't. He finally said, "That's why I wouldn't have your job for all the money in the world." He said, a crispness and clarity rising in his voice, "You're destined to be right only part of the time."
As you may have guessed, that's the voice of Bob Woodward, and reading a rather telling sequence from his book, of which you've no doubt heard, Veil, The Secret Wars of the CIA, 1981-1987, published by Simon & Schuster, and as you know, has caused quite a stir. So we start with that. Bob Woodward, who's associate managing editor of the Washington Post, and we know him best for his collaborative work with Carl Bernstein, All the President's Men and What Followed, and his study of the Supreme Court as well. But we come now to the book involving the late Mr. Casey, the CIA, and others. And so at the very beginning, the question has to be asked, this is a personal, why did Casey agree to see, you met him how many times now?
We had more than 48 substantive discussions on the phone, in his office, in his home, so forth. Now totally documented, though initially a number of people were trying to dispute that number of meetings. He talked to me because, to a certain extent, he knew I was going to do the book. He knew I had sources within his own agency, the CIA, that I talked to other people in the government. I had much of the story on a regular basis. I was also writing stories about the CIA covert activities for the Washington Post. So it was a way of how do I shape the story from his point of view.
In several things also, this makes the you and he together have, it seems to me, has the makings of a novel, too. He also wanted to know what is it you knew, you, the others, those members of whatever that press is.
He certainly did, and it was a love-hate, approach-avoidance relationship. Sometimes he would scream at me, as in that quote, getting off that line, which really is a fabulous, perceptive line that, in a sense, he could be talking about himself in the CIA, that you deal with contradiction, shadows, and mirrors, and you're destined to only be right some of the time.
And so we come about himself, and so we come to the book itself, Study of the CIA during the 6 years, Reagan years, but the 6 years of Casey's, shall we call it, stewardship.
A remarkable era, and I think when historians get into it more and more, they will see that Casey's presence, dominance in the administration, the hidden hand of covert action will define an era.
Now it starts right off with a predecessor, Stansfield Turner, who was the CIA head under Carter. And Turner is immediately bothered. He's scared by what is about to happen. Why is Turner scared?
This is right after the November election in 80. Reagan had beaten the sitting president, Carter, Stan Turner's old classmate from Annapolis, and immediately Turner saw a big change coming.
What was the change?
Casey was the change. Casey was an old hand from OSS. He was a conservative. He was somebody who had a series of prepackaged beliefs about action, that you have to do it. You can't hesitate and wring your hands. You can't dwell on your uncertainty and your doubt. And Turner, for his 4 years at the CIA, had been fighting this old boy network, the band of brothers in the CIA. And here was one emerging from the woodwork to take his job.
But nonetheless, when you say Casey, you really mean Reagan, don't you?
Yes.
So we have to keep that clear.
Yeah, absolutely. Casey and Reagan were soulmates, 2 years apart in age, had seen 4 wars in this country, had seen the Depression, had agreed on 2 very important things. the importance of capitalism, how it was a good system, everyone can make it, and the importance of fighting communism everywhere at every opportunity.
And he helped Reagan get elected. He was his campaign manager.
Right.
But also the phrase he used, a throwaway phrase involving Nicaragua, sometime as discussed, let's knock 'em off. A casual, let's knock 'em off, which could be Reagan as well.
Absolutely. One of the things they wanted to do, when they came in, Casey set up a little foreign policy advisory board because he wanted to be Secretary of State. He wanted to be the top dog, not just the CIA man. They wouldn't give it to him essentially because he was a disheveled, non-leading man presence. So he identified the insurgency, the leftist insurgency in El Salvador and Central America is the big problem area. This is where we're going to draw the line. We're not going to let the communists take over here. And in fact, as was the style of Reagan, still is his style, and of Casey, to not just be on the defense, but to be on the offense.
This obviously led to Contra Gate.
Absolutely.
I mean, all roads led to that. It seemed, as you write this, it seemed inevitable, didn't it?
They promised it. It was, if you go back and look at the Republican platform in 1980, they said, we're going to do something about the leftists in Nicaragua, the Sandinistas, said we are going to revitalize the covert action capability of the CIA.
So if there is a law that says you cannot give these guys the Contras backing, the Boland Amendment, we will contravene that.
That's right. And if you read much of this book, by no means all of it, but 10 or 12% of it deals with the Contra operation, and it shows its origin, how it was conceived, and I think really conclusively establishes the fact that it was an operation launched in deception.
Deception and mind made up, that's it, no matter what the public or what Congress may think.
Yes.
And so you have Turner, again, Stansfield Turner. He is to brief the new administration. And it's on page 68 of Bob Woodward's book. And arms control, that might cut the number of weapons in half was bullshit, Casey was thinking. What difference would it make? Maybe there's still enough to destroy the world. Now, Turner brought up civil defense, and now we come to it. A Reagan hobby horse, quoting from Bob Woodward's book. Reagan had suggested during the campaign against Carter that the Soviets were sheltering their population and preparing for nuclear war. Yes, Reagan said, as Turner broached up, we need more of that. No, sir, Turner said. I disagree. And Turner says only 10% of the Soviet cities could be sheltered. And he says this thing was a fraud. The idea that that civil defense was the big thing. It wasn't. And so we start right off the bat with that, don't we?
We start off the bat, if you look at the whole world, the CIA director, his beat is the whole world. You look in Central America, the Middle East, dealing with the Soviets, dealing with terrorism, you find that they had their philosophy. They knew what they were going to do. There was a blueprint, and Casey went about implementing it. The point is that no one was going to get in his way. Not the law, not the Congress, not even the White House. He was going to do it his own way. And eventually in the book, when you get into the period 1985, you see him taking the law into his own hands.
But you say not even the White House. The fact is the White House he knew would give it the okay.
That's right, but some of the national security advisors and the first White House chief of staff, Jim Baker, was often a brake on some of halting and slowing down some of Casey's activities.
But there was Haig, and now we come to a change from the Carter emphasis on human rights, we come to that, to the word is terrorism. And this is Haig's unique, at least he started. As Secretary of State.
That's right. This is in early 81. His first press conference as Secretary of State, he came out and said, the Soviets are behind terrorism worldwide. This is the issue we are going to focus on. It's interesting now. If you look back from this perspective of the fall of 1987, in a sense, Haig was right about terrorism as an important issue. As the book shows, he was wrong about the Soviet role. The CIA went through all the evidence and couldn't find a Soviet hand in this.
If we could wander back and forth, since you've earned this kick now, the Soviet role and how we interpret or misinterpret it, is they're behind it. and now we know far less than true, is that we come to the Korean, we can jump a bit, the Korean airliner shoot down. Casey said the Soviets pulled a boner. They didn't mean to. It was a mistake. They goofed up, but they did it. Reagan said it was deliberate on their part. And you've got Casey and you together watching Reagan on TV,
Yes.
saying it's deliberate, and Casey disagreed with him completely, but was nodding and saying what a great speech.
It was a fascinating moment. This
Describe
was in October of 1983. Casey had me over for dinner at his house, and his daughter cooked the dinner. And that night, Reagan was giving a speech on television. It was about a month after the shoot down of Korean Flight 007, a few days after the Grenada invasion, a few days after 241 U.S. servicemen were killed in the Marine bombing in Beirut. Very crucial time. Casey and I, we had dinner. We talked about everything. Again, running the Soviets, Latin America, again, cover. He had this. He truly had an extraordinary mind. We go down. We're going to tune in the president's speech, and I asked about the Korean airliner to Casey before the speech, and he said it was a foul up. Was his language, a foul up. Then Reagan gets on and repeats what he had said earlier, that it was a deliberate act of barbarism. So there you are, the head intelligence man sitting in the chair, having just moments before contradicted the President of the United States. And we kind of looked at each other and said, well, that's the way it is.
He said it's great.
And then Casey at the end said it was Reagan's greatest speech.
Casey said that.
Yeah.
Though he disagreed
Yes.
fundamentally with what he
That's right.
said.
You get to a point, and I think one of the themes in Veil is the political uses of information. In a way, it doesn't make any difference that 2 and 2 is 4. If you want to say it's 5 today or 26, you can go ahead and do it. And in the course of that dinner discussion with Casey, we talked about various numbers that the administration puts out, one of them being that the Soviets spend $4 billion in the Caribbean, Central American area a year to help Cuba and Nicaragua and other countries. And I asked him about that number, and he said it's flaky. Those numbers are flaky, that they're guesses, they're estimates. But you will find the government putting out these numbers and facts that, in fact, their own intelligence frequently contradicts.
So it doesn't matter. If we got a viewpoint, I want to get that viewpoint across. Get these Soviets, get these Sandinistas there, forget the human rights aspect, it's terrorism. And 2 and 2 is 5, but it's okay.
Exactly.
That's what you're saying.
And that's what some of the reaction to this book is. It's too true. And we somehow have to, let's paint it and not look at our government, try to make the conduct of me as a reporter or a journalist. Let's focus on that, and let's not see what the government has done.
Yeah.
Well, I think I have to be accountable. No question about that. But also you have to look at what's in the book. And it is a story of government gone haywire.
Yeah. Haywire. The book is called Veil. It also could be called Haywire.
Yes.
The
It
Secret
could,
Wars
and at
and
the same time,
yeah.
as many readers of it have said and reviewers,
Yeah.
it's basically, in some respects, a sympathetic portrait of Casey. I got close to Casey. I listened to him. My pledge to him was, you are going to get your say. I want to see why you made these decisions. He pointed me to his writings, his philosophy. He gave me a 600-page unpublished manuscript about his time in OSS during World War II, and in it you could see the seeds of what he was going to do.
Well, by the way, to me, this book it's about Casey, but beyond Casey. The book is also about a governmental, at this administration's policy.
And it's how you're going to use information when you've got this philosophy. Now, you have to give Casey and Reagan their due on this. They felt, and Casey perhaps was more articulate about this than the president, that there's verifiable evil in the world, that the communists and the KGB are a threat to civilization, to the world. Something has to be done about that. What Casey did, he got so consumed with this war the real war that is the secret war against the Soviets and communists and launching these covert actions worldwide, became so consumed with it that he thought to himself, who cares about the rules? Who cares about the apparatus that had been set up in the 1970s after the CIA scandals to monitor the activity of the most hidden branch of our government, the CIA and the other intelligence agencies? And he broke the rules and broke the law.
Yeah. Let's take a break, because we have to come to Haig and Casey, and they're being enamored of the works of Claire Sterling, the so-called authority on terrorism, and who we know now have been pretty thoroughly discredited, but their ideas coming from her rather than from whatever intelligence they got from the guys who were employed by them. We're talking to Bob Woodward, and the book is Veil, which is, Veil, by the way, is the name used, isn't it?
It is the code word for all their covert operations in the last several years of the Reagan administration.
And the subtitle of your book is The Secret Wars, the CIA, 81 to 87, the first 6 years of the Reagan administration. Casey, head of it. Simon & Schuster published. Resume after this message. So resuming with Bob Woodward and Veil and this matter of terrorism. And Claire Sterling, she's the one, Casey said, I get more from reading her book that cost $19.95 than you guys who were paid 50, 60 G's a year.
That's right. What happened, there's an interesting sequence that Claire Sterling, who is a reputable journalist who lives in Italy, did this book called The Terror Network, showing the Soviet role in terrorism worldwide. Haig got the galleys of it, read them, then went and held his press conference, say the Soviets are behind this. Then Claire Sterling wrote a piece based on her book for the New York Times Magazine, in which she quoted Haig, who really got his information from her. Casey saw the magazine article and said, wait a minute, our intelligence doesn't show this, and kept saying, find the Soviet hand in this. So they did what's called, and this is important, a national intelligence estimate on, are the Soviets behind this crucial issue? If they are, certainly something had to be done. There was a war between some of the intelligence agencies, and they fought about the meaning of something, but essentially came up with the conclusion that the Soviets are not playing the world as puppet masters in the terrorist field. This is stamped secret. It's never made public. It contradicts Haig's public statements. So the Soviets are left kind of scratching their heads and say, well, we've been accused of something that we don't think we did. Then some CIA analysts got into it and found that very small bit of Claire Sterling's information came from a CIA disinformation program that had been launched in Europe. So you find this, it's a catastrophe in terms of rational thought.
So we, the American public, are disinformed. That's
Yes,
what it amounts
we are.
to. We are euchred.
And what does it do? Now, I have no love for the Soviets, I assure you, and the Soviets are a worldwide menace. No question about that, and a lot needs to be done to thwart them. But we also are trying to deal with them in a negotiating situation. And when we put out something, it's like if you have a child and you accuse the child of eating the cookies and you later find out that it was somebody else and never straighten the record, you have in a very significant way eroded your relationship with that child. Well, dealing with nations is the same way. You've got to be straight about the data.
But the fact that some of his own people, Casey's own people, said some of her stuff, Claire Sterling again, absolutely preposterous. But that was ignored and was kept from us.
That's right. It was stamped secret.
By the way, one of the keys to this book is we, the American public, are being had.
Many times. Many times.
There's Gorbanov, for example, and I'm jumping around and
about 4 years ahead.
There's a free association connection
And
here.
he is the Iranian middleman who arranged these controversial arms sales to Iran.
Gorbanov was also the source of the story that Gaddafi has a hit team to assassinate Ronald Reagan. And it turns out that Ghorbanifar has flunked 13 out of 14 polygraph tests and is a congenital liar.
He is one of the all-time questionable figures. Casey was attracted to these kind of fringe people who are businessmen, who are wealthy, who deal with intelligence agencies. Ghorbanifar dealt with the Israelis, was connected to the Iranian intelligence service. And even though in 1981 Ghorbanifar was one of the people behind pushing this idea of the hit squad, they then, when he surfaced in 1985 with his latest scheme to sell arms to the Iranians, they swallowed the whole fishing pole on that, and we have that calamity, and the whole, all of the hearings and all of the look at the way the government was run, and in a sense, you see the seeds of it in the early years in this book, as you see Casey 81,
this
82,
book flows
83.
in that sense, but I see, for example, the 1-2 punch right there. Sterling authority, Ghorbanifar authority. Sterling on the European scene, the Middle Eastern, Ghorbanifar on the Gaddafi aspect. And these are the sources we bang. Coming back to a goof haywire, again, we come to that, but also a mind made up in the beginning. Law or no law, that's what we're going to do.
That's right. Now, again, one of the things I attempt to do in the book is give Casey's side, and I need to summarize briefly his side on the alleged Libyan hit team that had supposedly come to the United States to assassinate Reagan or to shoot somebody else in the cabinet. Remember, it's in the chronology here that Reagan was shot. He was almost assassinated in March of 81. That had a traumatic effect on Reagan and the other people in the White House. They saw this man. There was a few-day period when he was really in bad shape, absolutely at death's edge almost.
Oh, that's what you point out in the book.
And Casey said, my God, part of my job is to protect the President of the United States. So he cranked everybody up, to his credit, worldwide in the CIA. If you hear something about somebody's going to shoot the President or do something in our country, we are going to get on it and try to find out what was going on. In the course of this, there was some intelligence about what Gaddafi was threatening to do at a meeting or over the telephone. So Casey took it seriously. In the same period, you have the attempted assassination of the Pope. You have the successful assassination of President Sadat in Egypt. So there's a feeling that the world is a very dangerous place, as Oliver North said this summer at the hearings, and that something had to be done.
Yeah. And so that brings us to Nicaragua. If we freely associate, as we're talking to Bob Woodward, the book Veil, Simon & Schuster published story of Casey, but beyond Casey, of an administration and something gone a little on the goofball side, because the mind is made up. And so, Bob was too much for Goldwater. Goldwater said, this guy's flappy. But he also said, these guys sound like they want to make war.
That's right. Senator Barry Goldwater was chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee the first 4 years of the Reagan administration, and is somebody that Casey effectively had to report to and make sure that he was keeping the senator informed about various secret activities. Turns out that Casey was never leveling with Goldwater. At one point, Goldwater, in a closed top-secret meeting, heard a plan about what to do, what the CIA was going to do in Nicaragua, split the country in half, and at the same time saying this is not designed to overthrow the government. And Goldwater turned to the vice chairman, Senator Moynihan, and said, sounds like war to me. Yeah. But it was all top secret. They couldn't talk about it in public. They thought, well, their friend Reagan is going to do the right thing. When it came to the mining of the Nicaraguan harbors, there was a real Lisbon earthquake for these people. At the same time, when you lay it all out, Casey rolled them. Casey schnookered them.
But then he did it really without specifically, though, at the behest of Reagan. I mean, he was following what he thought Reagan's thoughts would be. Because Reagan does say, after it's all over, build it okay.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yes, there's no question about that. I don't think the president was the sort of person, as we well know, we know this, very well now, somebody who has operational control. He lays out the broad principles: win one back, win a country back for us, Bill, get the communists, thwart the Soviets, bolster capitalism, get our notion of democracy out to the world,
Win
and
one
left the
win
details.
one back for the Gipper. Win one back for
To a
the Gipper,
certain
no matter
extent,
what
that's
it
true.
is. So you make a reference there. There's a conversation you have, one of the many you come with Casey, in which, well, who's the head of the team? I am, but who's the real? He says, well, the president.
That's right. And that was, interestingly enough, last fall, after the Iranian arms sales had been disclosed. Casey was to give what was turned out to be his last secret testimony, top secret testimony to the intelligence committees. And one congressman from Oklahoma, David McCurdy, I believe, said, who was in charge of this, Casey or Admiral Poindexter, who was the national security advisor at the time? And he pushed Casey, and Casey finally said the president was in charge.
You mentioned Dave McCurdy. We got to come to the mining of the Nicaragua harbors in a moment. No, let's save Dave McCurdy for a moment. It's a very stunning sequence you have here with someone they thought who was a hawk, that's going to be on their side. This young congressman from
Oklahoma.
From Oklahoma. Let's stay with that and then come to the mining. And they thought he's going to back them on the Nicaraguan adventure. Perhaps read what he said there, because this is rather fascinating.
Well, it's real long here, but I should give a summary. I mean, what McCurdy was worried about is we've got this war going down in Nicaragua. We're supporting the Contras who were crossing the border, blowing up bridges, blowing up farms, and so forth. And McCurdy tries to make the point to Casey. He said, look, you've got to understand in Oklahoma why we are Democrats. And the answer, McCurdy says, during the New Deal, during FDR's tenure as president, the Rural Electrification Administration came in and helped the farmers, brought electricity and civilization. And the question McCurdy was trying to say, you are doing the opposite. You aren't bringing progress. You are bringing war, and you're going to lose these people.
And by implication, he was saying the Sandinistas, you see, were doing certain things there for the farmers, for the peasants there.
Yes.
Like the electrification, the literacy, and the health. That was the implication of what he was saying.
Interestingly enough, Casey was getting testy during this hearing. And then finally, Casey understood the point. Casey didn't agree with it, but he did get the point.
Yeah.
One of the things I found about Casey's mind, he closed it, but it was always open a crack. And he would let other foreign ideas in, and he made sure that he understood them intellectually.
He understood intellectually, but he's going to go ahead anyway.
Absolutely. Yep.
That's the thing. We've got to take a break, because now we have to come to the mining in the Nicaraguan harbor, and somehow I can't help but think of the Iranian mining of the Persian Gulf. We have to come to something, we'll come to that after this message with Bob Woodward. We'll resume with Bob Woodward. The book, of course, is Veil, The Secret Wars of the CIA, 81 to 87, Simon & Schuster, the publishers. And now we come to the mining of the Nicaraguan harbor, which is, of course, in violation of, we know the World Court had a trial. We walked out on the World Court, didn't we?
That's right. The CIA did it secretly. Did not fully and properly inform at least the Senate Intelligence Committee about it. And the question in retrospect, and I've got a sequence in here that lays out exactly how the mining came about, and how the mining came about was Casey, as he put it at one meeting, let's make the bastards sweat. Let's hurt the Nicaraguan economy by mining the harbors so ships will not come in and out. He thought this was going to be a cost-free, morally acceptable line of secret warfare. Turned out that when Senator Goldwater found out about it, he hit the ceiling. He said, it's dumb, it won't work. Turned out that the mines hit the ships of some of our allies, the British, hit a Soviet ship. This is how wars get started. If I may try to put what this book is about in a couple of sentences or a paragraph. CIA, their primary job is to know what's going on in the world, but maybe even more primary than that, their job is to to prevent war, to keep us so well informed about what the Soviets are doing or what the Sandinistas or the South Africans or wherever you go around the world. Tell us what's going on, and if we know enough, we can prevent war. What happened during the 6 years of the Casey tenure is, in a limited way, he was trying to start war. He was trying to go around, stir up trouble, mine harbors, start a covert war here or there. One of the things is we read about it in a book or in the newspaper, see it on television. It's an abstraction, covert war. What does that mean? It's dirty, it's secret. People still die. There still is death. It's still killing. It's real. And if there is anything that can cause this nation a great ill, it's war. And we should, our policy and our tradition is to avoid war, not to start it. And this kind of reckless mining of the harbors, that mining harbors is an act of war, just by any common sense definition of it. But they just kind of did it, well, let's make the bastards sweat. Well, there are people all around the world that we'd like to make sweat, perhaps. Question has just got to be asked, and it hurts. Will it work? What will it achieve? Look at some of these alleged successful covert operations, covert warfare. We put the Shah in 1954. 25 years later, we got the Khomeini Revolution. It will be decades before we have any kind of reasonable relationship with Iran. What have we wrought?
There's several things come up here to say. There's several strings to the bow here. When we put the Shah in, we knew that our CIA, because it was Quentin, not Quentin Roosevelt. Which Roosevelt was it? Kermit Roosevelt.
Yes.
CIA admitted. They said not admit both. We knocked over Mossadegh.
That's right.
Mossadegh, because he wanted to nationalize oil.
Mm-hmm.
That was it. And we put the Shah in, and then we know what happened. And now we come to the matter of the mining. Let's make the bastards sweat, even if it's illegal. That's exactly what the Iranians had in mind in mining the harbor in the Gulf, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
So they're almost a mirror image of us.
That's right. And this is the great danger and the great tragedy of the Bill Casey story, and that is that it's almost like you have to become what you hate in order to do it. And eventually in 1985, he became so frustrated with terrorism that he got the Saudi intelligence service to go and try to assassinate the leading terrorist in Beirut, who was responsible for some of the barbaric and unacceptable acts perpetrated against us. Sheikh Fadlallah, the spiritual head of the Party of God.
You've got to tell the story of Fadlallah, the attempt to assassinate him, and the end result.
Yeah, because it is significant in terms of what it tells you about Casey and how far he was willing to go. And it tells you about how we got into the Iran arms sales, interestingly. It's a whole prelude to that, and it's somewhat complicated. I'll try to simplify it. Got to go back to all of those terrorist bombings in Beirut against our facilities. It was a politically hazardous situation for Reagan and Casey. It was the thing that was going to lose the '84 election for Reagan, if anything. It turned out that it didn't even come close. But they were worried about it in '83 and '84, as they should have. Second, it was an intelligence failure for Casey. He was supposed to have warnings about these things so we could stop them, and he didn't, and hundreds of people were killed. So they finally decided we're going to set up our own, just like the movies, preemptive counter-terrorist hit team. Train 3 5-man units in Lebanon. They're going to go hit the terrorists before they hit us. It got into trouble. Casey's deputy, John McMahon, didn't want to have anything to do with it because he knew what it was. It was assassination, and that's banned, and it won't work. So the CIA wouldn't do it. Casey threw up his hands, went to the Saudis, who are used to doing things like that. They don't have intelligence oversight committees. They don't have democracy. They don't have a free press. They went out and tried to assassinate this man in Beirut, killed 80 innocent people, probably one of the worst things to ever happen. Couldn't kill him, so what they decided to do, they bribed him for $2 million worth of food, medicine, and scholarships for his followers, and to this day, there has not been another car bombing.
Now, we've got to stick with this particular story. That's a story and a metaphor at the same time.
Yes.
Fadlallah the terrorist, we're going to knock him off. It fails, we kill. That is, the venture kills 80 innocent people. So the next best thing is to bribe the guy.
Yes.
So he's bribed. It's not too far removed from the Iranian sale.
Well, in fact, it's the precursor of it.
So he's bribed. That's it. But 80 innocent people are dead.
That's right. But Casey says, aha, bribery works. For $2 million, you solve one of the biggest problems we've had. That's nothing. The CIA spends, and the other intelligence agencies in this government spend $25 billion a year. So $2 million is a tip. Is 25 cents to them, and they solve this problem. So they say, now how do we solve the number 2 terrorist problem, which is the hostages? Same method, bribery. The people who are holding the hostages in Beirut are influenced by the Iranians. What do they want? Not food, medicine, and scholarships like Fadlallah. They want arms. Thus, the Iran arms sales. It's a continuum. It didn't just all of a sudden say, hey, let's sell arms to Iran. It had this very secret, hidden origin. Once you know the origin and you see it in the context in the book, you can see Casey's behavior. Well, we just have to bribe the right people and we'll solve our problems.
So this led to Iran-Contra Gate.
Yes, it did.
Didn't it? But way, way behind it all was to get the Sandinistas to help the Contras. That's part of it. It was a double header here.
Yes, well, but the Iran arms sales created extra money, and as Oliver North put it very eloquently, and I believe truthfully, there was a plan for an off-the-shelf covert operation capability. Casey he took it off the shelf, and it was operational with the Saudis. They wanted to do it independently. That's why they had all that money left over in the Swiss bank account from the Iran arms sales.
Aren't we? The name of the book is Veil, and it could have been called Haywire or Goofball, and even Oliver North. Who was it said Oliver North an accident waiting to happen? We're talking about a wild, irresponsible, beyond the law kind of activity. If it has that base, we got to get them.
Well, I don't think Oliver North was an accident waiting to happen.
Didn't someone call him that?
Well, somebody has called him that. He wasn't an accident. He was a can-do person who took orders from the national security advisors in the White House, top person, took indirect orders or got moral support from William Casey, the head of the CIA. He was a lieutenant colonel. He was an operational officer doing what he was told to do.
And so he did his job.
He did his job.
He did his job. So we're talking about
and I just think
everything.
In fairness to Colonel North, you have to look and you say, well, okay, he should have known that this was beyond the law, that there was deception. This isn't the way we run the government. But the issue is not what Colonel North did. The question is who gave the orders?
Yeah.
And why did we get into this mess? And what does it tell us about the government? And if you're kind of sitting back there and the average person on the street, you're saying, well, this is haywire, but what can it do? I'll tell you what it can do. It can lead to disastrous relationships with foreign governments all around the world, and it can lead to war. The study of war is a study of accident.
Study of accidents.
And they in miscommunication, and that's what veil, to a certain extent, is.
And also, as you're pointing out here, see, who is it? Whose will is being followed? We cannot avoid Reagan, no matter what we say about Casey. He is his sidekick. He wants to do what the other guy thinks, even though he may not tell him everything, because you point out that the CIA has now become a tool of an administration rather than an independent agency.
It certainly is. At the same time, in fairness to the president, we don't know what Casey told him or what he told Casey to do. I did not penetrate very well the veil, if you will, of that relationship. What interests me as a journalist and an author, I guess, is are we going to get the answers to those questions soon? And shouldn't they be answered? Or shouldn't the questions at least be asked? And not learn about it when some historian digs into some diary or gets somebody 20 years down the line.
I don't quite understand why this is so mysterious. That's the part I can't quite get.
Well, I think you can build a case that the president had to know. I think you can also build an equally powerful case that he didn't know, that Casey was a master of deniability. And he knew, and he told me a number of times, I know exactly what Reagan wants.
You know, I can't help but think of a scene from Lillian Hellman's play The Little Foxes. The analogy is so stunning. In The Little Foxes, you remember the sister, that's Regina, the role played by Tallulah Bankhead and Betty Davis in the film. They got to get some money to pay this Northern Industrialist to open this factory where they are. And they haven't got enough dough. But Regina's husband, who's very ill, who's a decent man, is against this project. But working in the bank of Regina's husband is one of the brothers, his predatory brother's sons. Mm-hmm. And he opens the box and gets out negotiable bonds. And he's, look what I got in Uncle Horace's box, to the leading villain of the play, his Uncle Ben. And Ben says, oh, you were lent that money, were you, my uncle? No, I took it. Don't tell me where you got it. I don't want to know where you got it. A friend lent you. Don't you dare tell me where you got it. And this, to me, is the analogy to the White House and all below.
It could be the answer. And ultimately, though, who knew what and when, the issue is whose government is it? Who is president? And what happened here? And who's going to be accountable for it?
But as we're doing that, I'm thinking also of going back to Stansfield Turner, when all this is going on, this former CIA guy who thought diminish risk rather than take risk, mm-hmm. as you point out, in contrast to Casey. This was about the Beirut bombing, and the president was, let's go get him, or something like it. And what was that again? And Turner responds publicly, Mr. Reagan's comments are undignified and unworthy of the president. Do you remember that?
Oh, in 84, what happened is after a third Beirut bombing, September 20th, 84, of the embassy annex in Beirut, when fewer people were killed, Reagan, who was campaigning then for re-election, tried to blame Carter and Turner for this and said if we hadn't had this emasculation of the intelligence services under Turner and Carter, we would not have had this problem. Turner was so upset, he responded publicly, and his voice was almost quivering, and said, Mr. Reagan's comments are undignified and unworthy of a president. It is Reagan who has damaged the CIA by putting in people of questionable character. He has politicized the CIA with Casey. Turner went on to say, and this is in 1984 now, not now. Turner said, what do you read about the CIA today? You read about a director who has shady financial dealings. Casey had a number of financial problems and is involved in questionable legality and propriety in the secret war in Nicaragua. So Turner came to his defense and said, wait a minute, these guys are responsible.
Well, there's always this blame of others. I noticed that, too, this blame of others.
Yes.
It's another hallmark of this administration. We're talking to Bob. We'll take our last break talking to Bob Woodward. The book is Veil, The Secret Wars of the CIA, 81 to 87, Simon & Schuster. And after this, I have to come to some of the astonishing people on the CIA payroll, and we can't avoid Grenada and other aspects of it after this message. So resuming for the last slap with Bob Woodward, it was like King Hussein, the gallant old King Hussein of Jordan, who's been on the CIA payroll.
That's right. He was on the CIA payroll for about 20 years until I did a story in the Washington Post in 1977. In fact, before we wrote that story, the editor of the Post, Ben Bradley, and I got called to the Oval Office to meet with Jimmy Carter, who really didn't want us to run the story, but he took the king off the payroll.
And who was Carranza?
Oh yes, oh yeah, that's right.
That?
That's right. He was somebody who was getting about $90,000 a year. There were all kinds of people.
But this guy was outright killer. Carranza. He was a D'Aubuisson, the wild guy from El Salvador. Roberto D'Aubuisson's sidekick Carranza was also on the CIA payroll.
That's correct. One of the things Casey felt, in order to get into the nastiness that's going on in the world, you have to get some nasty people on your payroll. One of the other things that Casey did is he believed that we had to spy on friends all around the world. And so if you were the king of a country in the Middle East or in Africa or in Asia, and you would come to us and say, I need to be protected, we would give you protection, and then we would try to buy people in your palace staff.
And so we come to Grenada. Grenada was shortly after Falklands, wasn't it?
Well, it was in October of 83.
83. Now, we didn't have Grenada in mind originally. It was Suriname. Well, now here we have a Mac Sennett sort of thing. It's almost Mac Sennett or burlesque. But, of course, a great backing for the administration by the American public.
We wanted to win one back in Suriname, which is a small country in South America. Casey sent his boys out to do what was called a coup feasibility study.
Coup feasibility?
To see if we could overthrow the government, which was getting too close to the communists. They did the coup feasibility study, and it looked like it wasn't too feasible. The intelligence committees were told about it, and they hit the roof, and they wrote a top-secret letter to the president saying, you've got to be kidding.
So if we can't get them, we'll get somebody else.
That's right.
So they got Grenada.
And in there, it's nice you getting into all parts of this book, because it's really a chronology of everything that went on in the 6 years of the Reagan administration in foreign policy. But at one point, somebody got the Brazilian intelligence service to try to do Suriname for us. It was the Brazilian intelligence service's first covert operation, apparently, and they got a little assistance from the CIA. Casey was always willing, always anxious to get somebody out to do something.
Let's give it a shot. In other words, let's give it a shot. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter what the end result would be.
Well, he hoped the end result would be in our national interest. He felt he, in many ways, revealed himself when he wrote a credo for the CIA in 1984 and said we have to have a propensity for action. And what Casey meant is he was a venture capitalist. He believed in risk-taking. Put a little money down on it.
Oh, now, wait a minute.
Try it.
You said the venture capital being risk-taking, so guys do this in the world of finance, but he's going to do it in the world of international affairs.
That's right. And it's going to be not just some casual investment activity by an individual, but it becomes the foreign policy of this country. And you can't escape one simple fact, that we define ourselves by who we decide to go to war against covertly or overtly, or who we decide to bribe, or who we decide to assassinate. What do people in the world think about this country and our CIA? What are we trying to accomplish? Are we meddling in other people's business to the point that it no longer serves our interest, where we become kind of the cartoon characterization of the United States?
You know, this leads to the big question about the American public, doesn't it? I mean, disinformation is there, a wildness is there, and irresponsibility is there, a contravening the law is there, as in trying to get around the Boland Amendment, mining of harbors is there, and so the other guys do it as we did it, too.
That's right.
And
but
so
I think, this is now a #1 bestseller nationally.
Yeah.
People are buying it and reading it, and I think people care about it and say, hey, wait a minute, is this the way it should be? what does it mean, and how do we make it better? Now, to give the
Well-
president his due again, as I am inclined to do, at least to present the other side. He now has a new CIA director, William Webster, who headed the FBI for almost 10 years. And the new CIA director, Mr. Webster, has said publicly, we can conduct intelligence operations within the law, within our own rules. He has effectively repudiated the Casey era and the Casey methods.
But the American public has to watch, I think. I mean,
Yes.
we've had CIA before, too, pulled some. After we did knock off Mossadegh and we got Khomeini eventually, too, didn't we? That was long before Reagan.
That's right. And if you take some of the real experts in the intelligence field, and many of these people were among the several hundred sources I had for the book, you find them looking at this very critically and saying, when has one of these operations worked?
You know, one thing we haven't talked about, and there's an added bonus to this book, if you like Randy language. The language used by everybody, whether it be the White House staff or Barry Goldwater or Casey, is pretty wild. I mean, the four-letter words are pretty...
Well,
and become very funny in the mouths of these guys.
As they speak is how I quote them.
Yeah.
And when they sit at one of those meetings, it's hardball. And they use the F word and the,
But funny.
every other word.
You think a street gang is talking.
Well,
I suppose
it gets
not
pretty
too far
heated.
removed from that when you come and think of it.
They operate under a great deal of stress. Mm-hmm. They have a great deal of hope about what they are going to achieve. And they work very, very hard. Casey did, anyway.
Well, what has been any White House reaction or Washington reaction to your book?
Well, there's been a lot of reaction to it, indeed, and it has run the range. People furious about it, people saying there's not enough truth in it, people saying there's too much truth, people saying that Stan Turner, who was the CIA director under Carter, saying that essentially Casey comes out too well in this book. I let him have too much of his say.
Turner said that.
People saying everything. The interesting thing is that it's all true, and probably the thing I go to sleep at night about, worrying about, is what didn't I find out about? Yeah. One of my very best sources, somebody I know who knows heads of state around the world, intelligence services, called me 2 days after the book came out and chuckled knowingly and said, "You only got 5%.
Really? That deep? One last is a personal question to Bob Woodward. This much is made of the fact that Casey was, and you were there, and is it true? That the obvious question, how you penetrated the hospital and got through. This always comes up, doesn't it?
Well, it's kind of reporting 101
question.
That you go to the scene. I mean, in a sense, Casey was somebody who, as I describe at Vail, how he went around to Europe, Africa, Asia, the Philippines, always went to the scene. Of course I'd go see him in the hospital. He had the answer to one of the burning questions. There were thousands of questions that went unasked and unanswered. It's much harder to get a top-secret document than get into Georgetown Hospital.
Yeah, but there are some questions, real ones, answered in this book, and it's quite a book, too, obviously. Bob Woodward, Vail is the book, The Secret Wars of the CIA, 1981 to 87. Simon & Schuster, the publishers, and thank you very much for being the journalist you are.
Thanks.